The NFL playoffs are on the horizon, and this is where legacies are created and narratives around players and franchises change for better or worse. The Kansas City Chiefs are back-to-back defending champions and have won 3 Super Bowls in the past 5 years. They are the team everyone is chasing, and they are in the midst of a dynasty. But they are not the only team in the 2024 NFL playoffs. There's 13 other teams competing for a chance to play in New Orleans on the second Sunday in February, for a chance to be called Super Bowl champions, and for a chance to cement their legacy forever. And in today's video, we are going to break down 4 NFL teams with the most to prove in the NFL postseason. We are going to break down every scenario possible for each of the teams we discuss, because remember, at this point, the bracket is not finalized and there's a lot of things that could change for the teams in today's video. The 2024 NFL season has been extremely fun, and for some teams and fan bases, it's just getting started. And there is a lot to break down in today's video, and without further ado, let's begin. And we are starting today's video with the Green Bay Packers. The Packers are 11-5, and having an 11-5 record is nothing to scoff at, and there's countless NFL teams that would do anything to have an 11-5 record. But what is particularly unfortunate for Green Bay is who their 5 losses are against. They got swept by the Lions and Vikings, who are each 14-2, and they lost the Week 1 game in Brazil to the Eagles with a score of 34-29. The Eagles, of course, have also had a great 2024 season and are 13-3 and are NFC East champions. And when you combine the records of the opponents they lost to in 2024, the Packers that is, the records are 69-11, which is obviously insane. Only one of those 5 losses were by double digits, which was to the Lions back in Week 9, and unfortunately for Green Bay, when you lose to teams like that, and especially given that you were swept by not 1 but 2 divisional opponents who each have 14 plus wins, the noise from the outside is going to be loud. Period. There's no way around that. Ultimately, I do think Washington will beat Dallas in Week 18, as I think they would rather play the Rams in the wildcard round than the division rival Eagles, and I do think we are on a crash course for a repeat matchup from all the way back in Week 1 with Green Bay as a 12-win wildcard team. That's an extremely tough draw for a 7 seed, let alone a 12-win 7 seed, and obviously there's been a lot of discussion around the Vikings and Lions and who will be a 14-win wildcard team, but it's also pretty insane that there is a very good possibility the Packers are a 12-win 7 seed. Going to Philly and having to play the Eagles is a brutal matchup, but it's one I think Green Bay can win. Now, will they is of course something else. Neither team is unbeatable, and I think both teams are great, and I know the Packers haven't beat any of the top 3 teams in the NFC in 2024, but I do think they are a team nobody wants to play. They have a point difference of 124, they're top 10 in both offensive points per game and defensive points allowed per game, and one thing that I think benefits the Packers is they can effectively play whoever ball on offense, meaning they can beat you with Josh Jacobs, Jaden Reed, Tucker Kraft, Christian Watson, or any combination of the 4 and still come out on top. They've forced 29 turnovers in 16 games, which ranks 4th in the NFL, and I know Jordan Love gets a lot of slack for his interceptions at times, as he can certainly throw some Will Levis-esque interceptions, but he has not thrown an interception in over 150 passing attempts. The Packers are a very young team, as all of these skill position players we mentioned are 26 years old or younger, but if they go lay an egg in Philly, assuming that's where they play in the wildcard round, then I think the narrative around this team will change, and fast. I think there would be a very real chance this team would go from one that's up and coming and one that transitioned from Aaron Rodgers to Jordan Love seamlessly to a team that's good but not great, especially with the Lions and Vikings in their division. I did release a Week 17 recap with the Packers on the thumbnail captioned "They're fine," and I do believe they are fine in the long run, as it may be the only year in NFL history where a team has 5 losses and the combined records of their losses is a staggering 69-11, and it's not going to be every year where a 7 seed is a 12-win team. But the Packers are, in my opinion, the toughest division in football, and if they go out and lay an egg in the playoffs and Jordan Love has a stinker of a game, then I think this would be a very long offseason for the Green Bay Packers. Next up is the Baltimore Ravens, and I know you're probably thinking that we're going to talk about Lamar Jackson for most of the segment, and we'll get to Lamar, especially with his success in the postseason, or lack of, as he has 6 career passing touchdowns in 6 postseason games, and we'll get to Lamar in a minute, but I do want to talk about John Harbaugh as well. I like John Harbaugh a lot, and I think he's a tremendous head coach, and I think he is a future Hall of Fame head coach, especially if he wins a second Super Bowl. But what you may not know about John Harbaugh, especially for the younger audience, and this kind of makes me feel old, that there is a portion of my audience that probably doesn't remember the 2008 through 2012 Ravens, but the Ravens during that time span went 9-4 in the postseason. There's a reason people online defend Joe Flacco the way they do. His 2012 run was legendary. He threw 11 touchdowns in 4 games, and the Ravens won the Super Bowl. But since then, the Ravens are 3-6 in the postseason, but since the start of the 2015 season, the Ravens are 2-4 in the playoffs, and I think if they go one and done this year, especially considering that it would be against the Chargers or Steelers, teams that the Ravens beat in the regular season, I think that would be a cause for concern for John Harbaugh. I don't think he would be fired, as I think he is a great head coach, but I think there would be a lot of doubt the next time the Ravens entered the postseason. Now, with Lamar Jackson, this is a player that is having an all-time historic season. Right now, he is second all-time in passer rating, behind Aaron Rodgers in 2011, who had a 45-6 touchdown to interception season, and in a year where the Packers went 15-1. Third and fourth are Aaron Rodgers in 2020, in a year where he threw 48 touchdowns to 5 interceptions, and fourth is Peyton Manning in 2004, who threw 49 touchdowns to 10 interceptions, and in a year where he broke a 20-year-old record, as Dan Marino's 48 passing touchdowns was broke by Peyton Manning in 2004 in his second MVP season. That is the type of year Lamar Jackson is having. However, Lamar in the postseason is a completely different player. Lifetime, Lamar's career passer rating in the regular season is over 102, which is pretty insane, but when you go to the postseason, it drops all the way down to 75.7. He has a 2-4 record in the postseason, and his wins are over the Titans back in 2020, and then last year over the Texans, in which they were led by a rookie quarterback in CJ Stroud. You can't control who you play, even if it is a rookie quarterback, so we're not going to criticize a playoff win, especially when they are as rare as they are. But the following week was a potential legacy-changing game for Lamar and the Ravens. They put up 10 points. They lost 17-10 at home to the Kansas City Chiefs in a game that was very, very winnable for the Ravens. We, of course, remember the triple coverage interception. We remember the Zay Flowers reaching for the touchdown, and ultimately the ball got knocked out, and those plays happen, especially when you are playing a championship-winning team in the Chiefs, a dynasty in the Chiefs. Those plays are going to happen. But this is the year where the Ravens can really rewrite the narrative and really rewrite everything regarding Lamar Jackson's legacy. They will match up against the Steelers or Chargers in the wild card round. That should be a win. Whether they ride King Henry to a win, whether Lamar throws for a couple of touchdowns and a victory, whatever the case may be, the divisional round should pretty much be set that it should be Ravens and Bills at this point. Buffalo is probably going to play Denver in the wild card round, and I don't think a Bo Nix-led Broncos is going to go into Buffalo and beat Josh Allen. No disrespect intended, Broncos fans, but the divisional round of the playoffs should be Lamar Jackson versus Josh Allen. We saw this back in 2020, the week after the Ravens beat the Titans in the wild card round, and the Bills won 17-3. Taron Johnson had a pick six, a 100-yard pick six, and that really changed the entire game, and the Ravens were bounced. But it's different this time around, especially with all of the lessons the Ravens learned from their 2023 AFC Championship game loss. It's different this time around with a quarterback having an all-time historic season. I, quite frankly, don't care who wins the MVP award. It would be cool for Lamar to win his third MVP, as I think that would really push him up all time in the rankings, but the point is, this is supposed to be the year for the Ravens. You have a quarterback that's having a historic season, 39 touchdowns to 4 interceptions. You have a running back that is having an offensive player of the year caliber season in a normal year, as Saquon will win the award given that he has over 2,000 yards, but Derrick Henry's ran for over 1,800 yards and double-digit touchdowns, and you cannot go into the AFC divisional round of the playoffs this year against a team that you already beat by 25 points earlier in the season and run the ball 6 times. The Ravens have to utilize the run game this year, and Lamar Jackson also on top of it has to play better. When you have a player having an MVP caliber season in Lamar Jackson, a running back that's having an offensive player of the year caliber year in a normal season in Derrick Henry, and when you have a left tackle in Ronnie Stanley that will probably leave in free agency that's also aging, and when you have a tight end that's also aging in Mark Andrews whose future is uncertain at this point, and an offensive coordinator in Todd Monken who also needs to prove himself after what I would say was fumbling the bag last year against Kansas City as they only called 6 runs throughout the entire game that were not ran by Lamar Jackson, it is now or never for the Baltimore Ravens. And for Lamar Jackson, the opportunity to go into Buffalo and then to go into Kansas City and then to potentially beat a defense like the Minnesota Vikings or the Philadelphia Eagles or even beat a high-powered offense in the Detroit Lions in Super Bowl 59 in New Orleans, this is a postseason where it is now or never for everyone in the Baltimore Ravens organization. Next up is the Pittsburgh Steelers, and the Steelers' 2024 season has been a bit of a roller coaster. They started out not just 1-0, but 3-0 as they defeated the Falcons, Broncos, and Chargers in their first 3 games, and the defense held them all to 10 points or less. Now, if there are any Chargers fans watching, they would understandably want something pointed out in their game, and it's that they had 4 big players leave the game in Justin Herbert, Rashawn Slater, Joe Alt, and Joey Bosa, and I would want that pointed out too. Pittsburgh lost the ensuing 2 games to the Colts and Cowboys, then won the next 5 in a row to improve to 8-2, and have lost 4 of their final 6 games and are now 10-6. And their last 3 losses have not been a 27-24 game that comes down to the wire in a close one that barely got away. No, the Steelers' last 3 losses are to the Eagles, Ravens, and Chiefs, all of whom will probably be division winners, and the combined score in those games is 90-40. And the reason we use probably division winners is because the Steelers can technically still win the AFC North, but it would require a Dorian Thompson-Robinson-led Browns team to beat the Ravens in Week 18 at M&T Bank Stadium, and for the Steelers to beat the Bengals, which I don't think will happen, and that's not a hot take as the Browns are 18-point underdogs for a reason. But the Steelers have a lot to prove in the postseason because they have not won a playoff game since 2016, and there's only one scenario where I see them winning a playoff game this year. They have to beat the Bengals in Week 18, which is going to be difficult, and based on how each team is playing, I'll be honest, I don't think it happens. Now, like we mentioned with the Chargers at the beginning of the Steelers part, we also need to mention with the Steelers that they too have dealt with their fair share of injuries, specifically in the secondary and also by losing George Pickens for a couple of games down the stretch. But this final 4-game gauntlet for the Steelers of at Philly, at Baltimore, home against Kansas City, and home against Cincinnati always scared me with the 2024 Steelers regardless of health because this is a legitimate playoff schedule before the playoffs start. And my concern for the Steelers was playing 3 games in 11 days, which is not something I'm a fan of by the way, and that's not great for player health, but playing 3 playoff teams in 11 days is brutal. And if the Steelers do not beat the Bengals in Week 18, I think the Chargers will beat the Raiders, which would propel the Chargers to the 5 seed and the Steelers to the 6 seed. And at this point in the year, there is a big difference between going to Houston as the 5 seed in the AFC and going to Baltimore as the 6 seed. And the Steelers and Chargers can say what they want and give a cliche football answer of we'll play who's in front of us or whatever they would say in interviews, but you can come to a reasonable conclusion as to who each team would rather play in the wild card round. And if the Steelers put up a clunker in the wild card round, and if they lose again in the first game of the postseason, I think there's some serious conversations that needs to be had. Because remember, this team has not won a playoff game since all the way back in 2016. And truly, what is this franchise going to do? Realistically, what can they do? This is a bad year to need a quarterback for not just the Steelers, but for anyone. And if they go lay an egg and Russell Wilson and the offense only put up 10 or 13 points in the wild card round, then this could be a very dark offseason for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Next up is the Minnesota Vikings, and it's been a very fun year for Vikings fans. Whether it was starting out 5-0, whether it was Sam Darnold throwing 35 touchdowns, whether it was winning 9 games in a row for a chance to have the number 1 seed with a win at Detroit in Week 18, whether it was Kevin O'Connell becoming the first coach in franchise history to win 13 games twice, as he's done it in 2 of his first 3 years, or whether it was winning 14 games or more for the first time since all the way back in 1998, or the chance to be the first NFL franchise to have 2 15-win seasons. It's been a very fun year to be a fan of this team, but it really doesn't matter if they go one and done. if they lose to Detroit in Week 18, and if they go on the road to play Tampa in the wild card round, and if they're one and done because Baker Mayfield, who is quietly working on a very good season in his own right, as he will probably throw for 40 plus touchdowns, as he sits at 39 passing touchdowns right now, if Tampa sends them home and they're one and done after going 14-3, unfortunately, it really doesn't mean all that much. And then I think you have to have the conversation about Kevin O'Connell being 0-2 in the postseason, as we all remember the 2022 wildcard game in which the Giants went into US Bank Stadium and won, and there were already a lot of fraud allegations around the 2022 Vikings, as the Vikings were beat 40-3 by the Dallas Cowboys during the 2022 season, and they were even beat by double digits by the Eagles during that season as well. There were several fraud allegations, and the Vikings proved everyone right. Personally, I thought they would beat the Giants in the wildcard round that year and then lose in the divisional round, but that never happened. But if the Vikings lose in the wildcard round this year, despite being as dominant as they have been at times throughout the 2024 season, despite sweeping the Packers, despite beating the Niners, Texans, Packers, and Jets in a 4-game span to start the year 5-0, it really doesn't matter. Yes, there's going to be a lot of conversations about Sam Darnold and JJ McCarthy this offseason in terms of what they should do, and if you're wondering where I stand on that, because I know I've been asked that countless times throughout the past couple of weeks, I really am under the belief that at minimum they should franchise tag Darnold and have JJ McCarthy sit for another year, and in the absolute worst case scenario have a Jordan Love type situation. That should be the absolute worst case. But when you see the Kevin O'Connell post-game speeches, and when you see the Vikings buying all in, and when you see the level that they play at each and every Sunday, it's hard not to get caught up with this team, but there's still a chance they could be the 5 seed. Yes, it's unfortunate that the Vikings or the Lions will be a 5 seed wildcard team, but that's not every year, and I also don't think there should be this getting rid of the division winners and that the Vikings should be the 2 seed this year or the Lions should be the 2 seed or whoever loses, because I think there's a purpose for having division winners, and if you want to be the 1 seed in this case, then go out and win in Week 18. But when you sit back and actually think about how fun of a year it's been for the Vikings, whether it's Aaron Jones coming over from the Packers and going for 1,000 yards, or Justin Jefferson having a 100 reception, 1,500 plus, 10 plus touchdown season, or whether it's Byron Murphy having 6 plus interceptions, or Andrew Van Ginkel and Jonathan Grenard each having double-digit sacks, or the linebacking duo of Blake Cashman and Ivan Pace, this has been one of the most fun years in Vikings franchise history. Period. Not just over the past 2 or 3 years, but in the franchise's history. And I would argue it's been the most fun year since 2017, and then even before that, all the way back in 2009. But if they go one and done, it really doesn't mean anything. And that's the biggest thing as to why the Vikings have the most to prove in the postseason. I think Kevin O'Connell is a very, very good head coach, but if he falls to 0-2 in the postseason, and especially if they have a fluky game, if they have a game where Sam Darnold throws 2 or 3 interceptions, and if the Vikings get beat by double digits, which unfortunately is possible for not just them, but for any team, then we're going to have serious conversations about this team's future. Now, I don't think that's going to happen, but it is absolutely worth noting. This also applies to Sam Darnold, as he's thrown for over 4,000 yards, he's thrown for 35 touchdowns, he's won 14 games, and he set a record for the most wins in a first year with a new team. But if Sam Darnold goes out and has a stinker in the first round of the playoffs, then what are you going to hear all offseason? Whether it's the Vikings giving a franchise tag, whether it's the Titans or the Raiders trading for him, you are going to hear, guess what? It's still the same Sam Darnold that we knew from the beginning of the 2024 regular season, and when it's hell or high water, Sam Darnold didn't come through. I don't think it's going to happen, but I do think Sam Darnold and the Minnesota Vikings have a lot to prove this postseason. I hope you enjoyed today's video, and if you did, please like and subscribe, as only about 44% of people watching are subscribed and helps the channel tremendously. Hope you had a good new year, and until next time, please be safe and have a great day. Love you guys.